Hello, welcome to the Bigger Truth Show. I am Scott McMahon, and um, excuse my voice a little raspy and my nose a little ruddy. I'm just kind of powering through a head cold. Um, but I'm really glad to be here, and I'm excited for this show today. What I'm going to be looking at is first, just a couple highlights from a show that Flynn and Patrick Byrne did over the weekend together. And there's a couple gems in there. And so we're going to look at that. We're going to talk a little bit about Matt Gaetz, just a little bit, and where I think that this is actually might be heading, what's making the most sense to me, not just with Matt Gaetz, but with all of Trump's appointments. And then I'm going to look at something that's kind of related, which is how Trump has talked about. He talked about on the campaign trail fixing our election systems, and as he did that, that never really made sense to me because he's talking about doing something that is in the Constitution. It's the state legislatures that determine the manner in which the elections are held. Um, so how could the president change the election systems? And I've got some thoughts. So I'm going to share that. So that is what's on tap for today, and I think it's going to be good. You are most welcome to chime in with your comments, criticisms, suggestions, whatever it might be, and we'll roll with it. And so let's just go ahead and get started. So this is from Flynn's weekend podcast. He calls it the Skiff, and I'll let it.
And we're going to talk about some of the other touch points that brought us together, but also I think impacted Patrick in a way that, caused him to be asked more often by our government, elements inside of our national security state, to do things on behalf of the U.S. government. And
oh, I love that. They are, and that's the whole thing that Byrne has been admitting that he works for, and I've said this many times. He admitted in his book, and it looks like now in his movie, and here Flynn is admitting it, that Patrick Byrne has been working for the deep state all along. And what have they been doing? Well, and they've been total partners, 100% partners in the last 4 years. They have been working side by side, 100% on the same page with the same goals. They've been working together and take over the state parties, state Republican parties, that take over the election integrity movement, the Reawaken tour, the whole Christian nationalism thing, try to take over churches. They're doing all these things together. So Byrne has been providing a lot of the funding. Flynn just produced. He was the producer on Byrne's movie. They started the America Project together. They're in it. They're in it together. And so later on in the conversation, Byrne kind of says, what he thinks the outcome of that is.
Okay, well, the first thing I want to say, because you're such a modest man, your people should know, as a man who's been standing inside this maelstrom for 4 years, and it was about 4 years and 2 months ago that the general and I met, I don't think this country would have survived. I don't think we would have made it to 2022. I think the color revolution would have been over by June of 2021 had it not been for General Flynn. There was a period there where the Americans were completely psyched out. They had just kind of accepted that there was some new world order and the Constitution didn't matter. And we had somehow all kind of agreed with that, although no one remembered agreeing with it back in those early days of the Biden administration and it was General Flynn who said we have to disrupt that.
Okay. So he's admitting that he's disrupting. This whole thing is just like, I feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone, because what he's saying is the opposite of the truth. And this happens all the time with these people. When I was doing my very first report talking about and looking into Christina Karamo, it was like mind blowing. How could this be the case? Because everything that she says is the opposite of the truth. And this is where they get it. This is the same thing that's happening within state parties. There's so much confusion, there's so much chaos, nobody knows what to believe. And it's because of these guys, because this is the way that military intelligence operations work. They're putting this out there. This is a limited hangout. Burns' movie, his book is a limited hangout because he knows he's about to get caught. He is. They tried to, and this is really what it boils down to. Flynn and Byrne and Sidney Powell got into the West Wing on December 18th, 2020, to try to manipulate President Trump and convince him to sign the Insurrection Act. And fortunately, he did not do it. And had he done it, I believe that Trump would have ended up in prison. I mean, the Insurrection Act, what it was calling for was the military takeover of all of the election systems and the machines to do a recount of the ballots and an inspection of the whole election. And the reality, because there was a ballot for every vote, is it wouldn't have shown anything. It would have been seen as an actual insurrection. Trump would be in prison right now instead of being the president-elect. And I believe Trump knows that. And Patrick Byrne and Flynn are just scrambling. Like there's an implosion going on. It's happening kind of in slow motion, and it's quite entertaining for me to watch because they and their followers have been so hostile to me personally, as I've just been trying to share what I'm seeing. But I don't see anything. If anything, had it not, I mean, here's Patrick Byrne saying, if it weren't for Flynn and him, the two of them together, if it weren't for their actions over the last 4 years, that the color revolution would have been complete and there would be no country left. Actually, that's completely false. I mean, we would have had a red wave in 2022 if it weren't for the psyops that Byrne and Flynn were running. Had they not taken over our elections, or the election integrity movement in the days after, starting the days after the 2020 election, and gotten everybody focused on the machines and spread their narratives of hopelessness and despair and anger and fear, then many more Republicans would have showed up to vote in 2022. Had they not had these controlled opposition candidates like Christina Caramo and Kari Lake, then we would have the governorship, the Secretary of State, and the Attorney General. The Republicans would, in at least Michigan and Arizona. My guess is that they ran similar candidates in the other swing states as well. I haven't looked into those as deeply. I do know that in Georgia, I'm starting to look more into Georgia. I've got some sources there that I'm working on. And but yeah, I definitely, I've shown already how it happened in Michigan, in Arizona, where they put forward these kind of Manchurian candidates that deliberately lost, not just for themselves, but for all the other Republicans. And they were all linked to Flynn and Byrne. Had they not been there, right now, we would be in such a better place. Such a better place. Had we not been there, they wouldn't have taken over and caused so much chaos and havoc in state Republican parties. We wouldn't have had state Republican parties like in Maricopa County failing to endorse Republican nominees and doing hand counting of paper and teaching people how to hand count ballots instead of getting out the vote. And Kari Lake would actually be the senator. And if it weren't for these people going crazy, trying to promote here in Michigan, trying to disparage Mike Rogers after the primary, leading up to and after the primary, well after Trump chose him, and even disparaging Trump, then we'd have a Republican Senator, Mike Rogers, here in Michigan. These people have done zero good. All they have done is help the people that they claim to be fighting against. And I've shown how Patrick Byrne, I firmly believe, is and always has been a lifelong communist. He claims to be a libertarian, but libertarians don't name their cats Che Guevara. Libertarians don't hold a giant picture of Mao Zedong on their stairwell. No, he's he speaks Mandarin. he took his first job for the CCP when he was 17 years old. And he talks about that in his book, although he doesn't say it's for the CCP. But I do know that it is somebody that was connected with the CCP. He's claimed to be BFFs with Hussein Alamani, who was the black arms dealer of Al Qaeda and the the Islamic terrorist network and Iran and Hezbollah. And he was BFFs with him. He's been in hiding in the Middle East now for the last 3 months. Much of that he was in Azerbaijan. People don't go to Azerbaijan just because it's a cool tourist location. So there's a lot going on with Patrick Byrne and Mike Flynn. I'll let him continue.
And the efforts that he did, especially in those first 2 years, when people were so disoriented, that historians will look back and understand the role General Flynn.
They did the disorienting. These were the disorientors. He didn't. Well, please, someone name one thing that Patrick Byrne and Mike Flynn did to bring cohesion and peace and confidence. Name one thing that they did to actually help Republicans. Just one thing. I'd really like to hear it. All right. Oops. Lost my spot. Okay.
People were so disoriented. The historians will look back and understand the role General Flynn played. I don't think we would have made it out of the PSYOP even to get to an election in 2024, maybe not even 2022, had it not been for his understanding of what was going on.
All right. Just 100% just gaslighting. That's what that is right there. Gaslighting. I have not had a chance to watch the entire thing. I'm sure there's more gems in this just ridiculous conversation between two, in my view, ridiculous people that are worshipped. It's unbelievable to me how people worship these two men, but they do. All right, so now we are going to go into Matt Gaetz. And during yesterday's show, I learned live on air that Trump had chosen and selected Matt Gaetz to be his attorney general. And my immediate response was really shock. How could that be? Because I've been looking into Matt Gaetz and especially into his connections with Roger Stone. And there's a lot there. There's a lot there. And there's a story that I have been working on that I just can't talk about. But there's a lot there. and part of it, let's just look at this. So Roger Stone, there was this movie called A Storm Foretold, and maybe you probably haven't seen it because it's not available to view in the United States. The only way that you can watch this movie is if you use a VPN in another country, so that the you're accessing a foreign streaming service like in Australia or in Europe or something, and they actually think that you're there in that country. That's the only way that you can watch it, because Roger Stone sued the publisher to make sure, or the distributor or something, to make sure that it wasn't shown anywhere in this country. I mean, this is censorship, and the reason for that is what the movie shows is that Roger Stone did a whole lot to plan and create January 6th. And afterwards, much of the movie is him trying to cover his butt and seeking it covers him as he's trying to seek a presidential pardon, a preemptive presidential pardon, to protect himself in case he ended up getting indicted for his actions related to January 6th. So here is, and this is interesting, this is a conversation between him and Matt Gaetz from that movie.
An American acting judge says you can't get out and tell people the truth, what's really going on. So Roger, you stay after them. We're still with you. We're going to keep America great together.
How you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
Holding up.
Still running from the wall?
It's really difficult.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing I just want to point out here is that um the obvious it's obvious that the camera's far away, and they don't want Matt Gaetz to know that they're filming them. So, the camera's far away, but they've got good sound, and it's very clear by the sound that Rogers got a mic, like he's wired, and I I highly doubt Matt Gaetz knows it. And so that relates to what Patrick just said here, which is it possible Matt Gaetz was investigating Stone? So it is possible. It is possible. And I hope that that's the case. I know for a fact that, especially early on in Matt Gaetz' political career, Roger Stone was his mentor, leader, guide, campaign manager. He was kind of Matt Gaetz' everything. I don't know if that's still the case. I do also know that yesterday I had a friend that was watching Alex Jones live yesterday. Excuse me. And Roger Stone was on with Alex Jones, and this was at the time when it was Trump announced that this was going to happen, and Roger Stone was just like on fire, just absolutely overjoyed. He said that Trump was texting him last night about it, um, and and so he, and he couldn't share it until it was announced, and he was just, saying that he was trying to imply that he was in with Trump and that he's very in with Matt Gaetz, and they're just talking about how just great this is that they're, kind of indirectly part of the Trump administration. But it is possible, Patrick, that you're right. It is possible. And so let's just watch the rest of this conversation because I think it's interesting.
I mean, I may have to appeal to the big man.
I don't think
Okay, so they're appealing to the big man, trying to get a presidential pardon from
the
Trump.
big guy can reach you. This is so fucked.
Correct. So if I need a pardon, I'm going to be counting on you.
Since there are many recording devices around right now,
I
I
haven't-
cannot speak freely about the work I've already done on that subject.
It's really
So, and he does say there, I can't speak freely about the work I've already done on that subject. So, there is apparently work that Matt Gaetz had already done to try to secure a pardon for Roger Stone. I mean, that's just, I don't think that's reading too much into that. And Bradley, Dan Bongino on his show this morning had some remarks about Flynn types no longer being in the new administration. Oh, that's awesome. Oh, that's awesome. That's great. The more mainstream this gets, the better. That's just really good. So wonderful. That's fun. So, certainly there was this, and that little clip right there was one of the first things that came to mind for me, even yesterday during the show. I was thinking about that as soon as Matt Gaetz, but also about a story that I have been working on that's relates to Gaetz' first campaign for Congress and when he first won. And unfortunately, I can't share it, but I'm trying to get it out in another means. So we will see what happens. But I do want to share. So as I was thinking about this and thinking, okay, let's look at what. Where is it here? Right here. So this is a good. This is actually in the Canadian press. And what Republicans are saying about Matt Gaetz' nomination for Attorney General. And there are some really good quotes in here. So I'm going to focus on the senators because I think that's really pertinent. So Trump knows, and he went through this. It was rough his first term because they had a Republican, or they had a Democrat-led Senate, and they did everything they could to prevent his to avoid confirming his choices. And I think it was in 18 that he got that we got a Republican led Senate. And So that kind of freed things up, and that's when things started going better. Or maybe there was just a bare majority. I don't remember exactly. But anyways, I mean, he had a lot of trouble getting his appointments confirmed, and so the majority, the Republican majority in the Senate is 53 to 47, and so he's got to have at least 50 votes to get these confirmed, and so if he gets four defections, it's not going to happen. And the interesting thing is that Matt Gaetz is clearly the focus. That he's definitely a lightning rod. But so Susan Collins from Maine, she's a big one. She's probably more of a Democrat than a Republican. Um, you know, so she says, obviously the president has the right to nominate whoever he wishes, but this is where the Senate's advise and consent process is so important. I'm sure that there will be many, many questions raised at Mr. Gates's hearing if, in fact, the nomination goes forward. So even suggesting that that he may not even get the nomination, which could be. I mean, it could be that this is some sort of an act of some sort, and um, that Trump has something else in mind. I mean, it very well could be. I think most people, myself included, had expected that it was going to be Ken Paxton. Okay, so now we got Senator John Cornyn. John Cornyn had the second most votes for the Senate Majority Leader. He says, "We'll handle it like any other nomination. I'm not going to prejudge any of these." Um, and Senator Kevin Cramer says, "I think it's a little bit of a test. It will take a lot of political capital to get him confirmed." So there's some doubt. Lindsey Graham is supportive largely because he knows he's going to have to run for reelection in 26. So he's going to be these last 2 years, the first 4 years, of course, he was in a total say one thing, do another, and the doing was mostly on the side of the Democrats. So now he's going to be like a super mega for the last 2 years to try to get himself reelected. So then we got John Thune. He says that's probably a good question for the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Isn't that interesting? So he's saying that that it's going to go through the Judiciary Committee. And so then we got Chuck Grassley is the chairman. It says likely the next chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He says, "I suppose I'll have to look at it. That's all I could say at this point because I don't know much about Matt Gaetz." And here's one. Mark Wayne Mullen from Oklahoma says, "Matt Gaetz and I, there's no question we've had our differences. I completely trust President Trump's decision making on this one, but at the same time, Gaetz has to come to the Senate and sell himself. There's a lot of questions that are going to be out there. He's got to answer those questions." Lisa Murkowski, the co-creator, inventor of ranked choice voting in Alaska, and the reason why she's there as the senator is ranked choice voting. But she says, "I do not see him as a serious candidate. The president is free to nominate whoever he may wish. Our constitutional role in nominations is to provide advice. I don't know that any of my Senate colleagues advise Matt Gaetz' name should go up. But it's what Trump apparently has advanced. But then our role is to determine the consent end of it. Do we give our consent or do we not?" Of course, Marco Rubio, I don't know that he would have a vote because I think he'd probably, I guess it would depend on whether or not he's confirmed for Secretary of State by then. And then Tom Tillis is another senator. So from North Carolina, he says, "I've got very few skills. Vote counting is one. I think he's got a lot of work to do to get 50 votes in the Senate. Presumably, the folks who have put him forward have gained that have gamed that out. But I'm sure it will make for a popcorn eating confirmation hearing. Absolutely. It's going to be entertaining. Mr. Gaetz and I have jousted on certain issues between the House and the Senate. There's obviously been a lot of disagreements between members of the Senate and Mr. Gaetz. So, and I think his is the most honest of all of those. So, and that was kind of my second reaction is, okay, how in the world is Gaetz going to get confirmed? Because the Senate's got to confirm him. Patrick says, "Yes, I am not 100% sure, but I believe Matt has been a part of the good side if you like to help expose from within. And I just don't know. Trump's pick so far is achieving its goal by upsetting and rattling the deep state. And that's kind of where we're going. So along those lines, this video I just think is funny. I mean, it's hard not to be endeared to the guy.
Why is it that the women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions? Nobody wants to impregnate you if you look like a thumb.
Is it safe to say that based off of your comments, you're suggesting that these women at these abortion rallies are ugly and overweight?
Yes.
What do you say to people who think that those comments are offensive?
Be offended.
That's a funny little clip. So, and he does offend a lot of the right people. And so, time will tell. Really, time will tell. I do believe, based on Roger Stone's behavior on the Alex Jones show yesterday, and even continued, Roger Stone is definitely on his best behavior the last week or so, as I've been watching him, and he definitely seems to be giving off the impression that he feels that he's in. I don't see any nervousness. I mean, if there were hostility there, or if he sensed, and Roger Stone's a great actor. He's been doing this since Nixon, and he's been a crook since then, I'm sure. But yeah, he's I just don't see that he's nervous about it. So I don't know. Time will tell. Time will tell. And I'm sure Trump's got something in mind, and we're going to see what happens. But the next thing that I saw, and this is kind of along the lines of what you just said, Patrick, is looking at here on X. So this account, I wasn't following it until today. Joe Lang, Lange, and he says, just in case you don't see what's going on here, Trump is the greatest civics teacher in our country's history. And he goes on, this is a long post, rather than read the whole thing, I'm just going to say that summarize it in saying that Trump is actually he's suggesting that Trump is actually looking for a fight. He says that this is purposeful. Trump wants this fight. He wants it to be very public. And that makes sense. I mean, it's not just Gates. I mean, it's just about every one of his picks angers someone, even on our side. So, there are people who are in the Senate who absolutely hate every single one of his picks, and some more than others. Some of them will please more people than others. For example, Marco Rubio, because he's in the Senate, that should be a pretty easy confirmation for Secretary of State. And he's been there long enough that he's got a lot of relationships with both sides, and I'm sure that'll be an easy confirmation. But there's a lot of the picks that I think are going to be very difficult, and I think he does like it. It makes sense that Trump is, and he's doing this now so early, and you just wonder why. And so this is one hypothesis, and I think it's an interesting hypothesis. So he says the power belongs to the people. He just won a massive mandate. All these mandates now get to be contrasted with the preferred candidates of the establishment, but it's way more than that. This fight is over. Whether or not what it's really over is whether or not a president gets to choose his own cabinet to run the executive branch. And that's really true. I mean, his appointments, this is the executive branch, and we have the separation of powers. We've got the executive branch, which executes the laws. We've got the legislative branch, which creates the laws, and we've got the judicial branch, which judges based on the laws. And they're each supposed to be separate and not bleed over into each other, but hold each other accountable. And that's, those powers are supposed to be separated. But what we've seen is the legislative branch has gotten way out of control. I mean, they think that they're over, that they hold trials as if they're over the judicial. And they try to infringe upon the judicial branch. Excuse me. And they also do everything they can to try to supersede a president that they don't like, as they did 2 impeachments in Trump's last thing for nothing, over nothing. They did everything they could to get in the way and to prevent Trump from doing the job that we elected him to do. And so Trump is going knives out here and saying, bring the fight. Let's do it. And let's bring this to the Supreme Court and let's fix this problem, is what he's suggesting. And that, he says that going back to the um the way that the Senate originally confirmed appointments, it was more of an advisory role, and it was less of a um the power to confirm or deny. And so this right here, this is from the United States Senate website, and it says about executive nominations historical overview. And it says the framers of the Constitution granted the Senate and the president shared power to appoint judges and civil officers. So this is judges and civil officers, which is, the cabinet positions would fall into civil officers. In its first decade, the Senate established the practice of senatorial courtesy, in which senators expected to be consulted on all nominees of federal posts within their states. So, when there's a federal post within their state, that they would expect to be, it was this courtesy. And, it wasn't, we're going to lord this over you, and you better choose somebody that we're going to approve of, or you're going to have to choose somebody else. I mean, they're really, the Senate has put themselves into a position where they are over the executive in this, and that they're doing, I wasn't even sharing my screen. I thought I was. And that they are, so they're putting themselves where they're over the executive branch, and they're over the president, and that's what they're, that's a problem. This creates a conflict, and because they are bleeding over, they're going beyond if you look at the 40,000 foot view of what our Constitution describes in the separation of powers, they've expanded, and the legislative branch of our federal government has expanded way more than the others. And so that's, and I think that's really where Trump is going. He's saying, I was elected to do a job, and I'm gonna go forward full on boss mode. And what I was talking about yesterday, in terms of how what Trump was saying in his 10 points of how to dismantle the deep state, it's going to take some disruption. It's going to take some pretty, a fairly heavy hand to get that to happen. And Matt Gaetz could do that. I mean, he's not afraid to speak his mind, and he's very good at saying the right things. He's very good at standing in a fight, and maybe he's exactly what we need. And I just, I think that the justice that so much of us want is relating to January 6th. And if we look at the causes of who set that up, it's very difficult to argue that Roger Stone and Flynn and Patrick Byrne were not involved in that setup. And so we will see. And I think that Trump knows it, at least to an extent. And all we can do right now is see. You or I aren't in that job. Fortunately, I don't know that I would want that job. It's way easier to be an armchair quarterback. So now I want to go into where is it here? I'm going to talk for a minute about what I think, because I talked about this in another episode. And if you missed it, I think it's important to repeat, because the thing that was lost, and I think absolutely deliberately, in the Flynn Network's takeover of the election integrity movement, is any real solutions. There were no solutions presented. I mean, they talked about their solutions being paper ballots, no machines, one-day voting. And that's not a solution. So saying no mail-in voting, no machines, the there's been a lot of complaints, and I think that there's justified complaints about how long it's taken Arizona to count their ballots. But they had a 4-page ballot. They had 79 issues on their ballot in many precincts across the state. And it was a 4-page ballot, I believe, everywhere in the state. And so, I mean, you can't hand count in any reasonable amount of time 79 different issues on a 4-page ballot across for some 3 million voters. You can't do it. It's just not possible. And so the hand counting thing, I think, is extremely misguided. Extremely. There need to be good systems that are expedient but also transparent and trust building. And so, I think they talk about free and fair being, adjectives. We need to have free and fair elections. What in the world does that even mean? I mean, it's already free, fair in whose eyes? I think what we need is transparent elections and trust building elections. And that's something, it needs to be something that they need to have integrity and something that we all Americans need to be able to trust, largely because of the transparency, regardless of whether a Democrat or a Republican is administering the election. Bradley says the Florida vote system is pretty secure and fair. And yeah, I think that Florida has some of the better ones. Oklahoma they have some really good systems. In Oklahoma, I think it was in Tulsa, said that they rejected 4% of the mail-in ballots, of the absentee ballots, because they didn't follow the directions, or they missed a signature, or they didn't get the notary, or because they require a notary, which is really important. So I think there's, they talk about paper ballots, hand count, no machines, one-day voting, or paper ballots, one-day voting, no machines, as their trinity of solutions. And I just don't think that that's the solution. But here's the 3 that I'm going to give that I think are absolutely necessary and that are purposefully left off, because what they're putting out there, just, it's not a real, it's kind of like zero emissions for the left. You put out this perfect idealistic solution that is just, it's never going to be politically feasible. But what it's going to do is cause all kinds of chaos and destruction along the way. And that's really the goal. So here are my 3 things. The first is universal voter ID. We need voter ID and citizenship verification for all in-person and absentee voting. And that's just absolutely necessary. I think the only way to accomplish voter ID for absentee voting is with a notary public, to get a notarized, to have a notary sign and basically an affidavit that they have reviewed your ID. So that's number 1. Number 2 is meaningful voter roll reform. Our voter rolls are completely shielded from transparency. Here in Michigan, it's a complete work of fiction. The ERIC system is just a mess. What it does is it gives third-party access to these far-left NGOs to the voter rolls, so that they on their computer can just add a name and address, and presto, you've got a voter, and the local clerk knows nothing about it. So there's 3 aspects of, and this is not just my creation. It's just everybody that I talk to that actually knows about election integrity. I talk to them about, well, what are the solutions? What can we do? And this is kind of how I've boiled it down based on talking to, I think, some of the best minds in election integrity, the people who have been silenced or cut off by all the grifters in the movement. And so the 3 things for meaningful voter reform: 1 is no more third-party access. The only ones who can add a voter are the local clerk or the Secretary of State, and that's it. Number 2, it needs to be easy to remove bad voters, dead, moved, non-citizen voters. And so that it needs to be a streamlined process that can be done on the local level. And that's really essential. And so that anybody can check and they can see, and that, people over a certain age, if they're over 90, they need to be sent, they need to be probably automatically removed and sent a notice. Do you really, are you still voting? Are you still alive? And I don't think that would be offensive to them. There are people in my little township that are 106 on the voter rolls. So, yeah, that's it. They need to be cleaned up. And then duplicates need to be removed. Any notice that goes out from the Secretary of State that's undeliverable, that needs to be an automatic remove. So there needs, we need to be able to remove and then the last thing on the voter roll reform is it needs to be transparent. And what that means is the voter rolls, the qualified voter file, it needs to be publicly viewable on the Secretary of State's website, on the local clerk's websites, 24/7 for the whole world to see in real time without a FOIA. It's just, there's no reason not to. That's just a part of doing business as a voter and as a citizen. And we need to be able to monitor that. Every American needs to be able to monitor that in real time. And it's critical. Right now it is a complete fiction here in Michigan. I'm sure that's the case in other states too. They just, it's there, because of that, the elections are not certifiable. So number one, voter ID, number two, voter roll reform. And then the third is, essentially a citizen audit. And I think that the two ways of doing that is to make sure that the source code for the tabulators and the servers is open source and publicly auditable. And then the other thing is putting the ballot images online so that anybody can do a hand count or run, create their own software or whatever to recount the ballots, and everybody knows. I think we do those three things. We can keep early voting, we can keep absentee voting, because those are conveniences that are really good, make it easier for a lot of people. And we can keep the machines, and we can streamline our processes and make it faster. And then we also are able to, monitor whether or not there are changes in the ballots, in the algorithms, in source code, all that kind of stuff. So that is the solution, I believe. I think that's the best solution. I'm totally open to suggestions on that. But I've been thinking, okay, so how does Trump actually accomplish this? And so this is what I found. And let me find it here. Okay. So this is the United States Election Assistance Commission. And it is, what they do is they have these election management guidelines, and there's a lot to it. So it's 19 different chapters, and it covers everything from office administration, contingency planning, building community partnerships, system security, physical security, voting system certification, acceptance testing, ballot building, pre-election testing. So these are federal guidelines for how the elections are run. And this is something that I haven't seen anybody talk about. And this is, I would hope that there's somebody close to Trump that knows about this, because what they do is they provide federal funding. So the United States Election Assistance Commission, they provide grants and federal funding to counties and states for machines, as long as they get machines that follow their guidelines. And so it's an incentive thing, and it's ongoing grants and stuff like that. And so, the way to control something like this is through the funding. And so I would hope that there's some look at this. I think that if Trump is saying that we're going to fix our elections, that this is probably what he's looking at. But I think, there's a lot of people who follow for whom election integrity is, it's basically a religion. And they think, where this is the most important issue, or they think that our elections are hopelessly flawed. And I don't think that there's any hopelessness at all. And we've got, and this is how we solve it, is by talking about actual solutions. We got to kick all of the grifters and people who are trying to make money off of the movement by filing bad lawsuits that are never going to succeed. We're not going to fix our election system in the courts. It's not going to happen. It's already been proven. We're not going to fix our election systems in the courts because that's just the judicial branch. They get to decide on the laws, on, you know, the interpretation of the application of the laws. The laws are created by the legislative branch, but they are also influenced by the executive branch. And so this is the way that I think that Trump could get some really good stuff done nationwide. So I'm just putting that out there. I don't know if this is something that's on anybody else's radar. I want to give a hat tip to Candace Zarni in Arizona, who's the LD3. She was the official LD3 chair, and we're waiting on a court ruling that I think is coming today on whether there's two LD3s. So it's a mess. And LD3 is the largest legislative district in Arizona. It's in Maricopa County, and there's the LD3 that does Republican things, getting Republicans elected, and there's the LD3 that whose meetings last hours and hours, and there's all kind of fighting and intimidation and mental illness. That's, I think, the best way to describe it. And so I'm hoping that the Candace Zarni group wins. She's made mistakes, but she's doing, I think, you know, she's sincere in what she's trying to do. So, but she and I were talking about this. She brought this to my attention, and I think that this is something that's worthy of sharing. So that is what I've got today. If there's any questions about this or anything else, I'll be happy to entertain them. Otherwise, I think that the bottom line and where I want to leave with is that whatever it is that happens, it's definitely going to be entertaining. and I really, you know, I'm sure that Trump has a plan here, and he certainly chose people. And, you know, another one that I've been looking at is Tulsi Gabbard, and I had not really looked much into her background, but Trevor Loudon has. He wrote a whole chapter about her in one of his recent books, and I have a lot of respect for Trevor Loudon. He's an anti-communist. He's been just researching communists and their connections with each other and the different organizations, similar to what I've been doing with Flynn and the Flynn Network and his organizations. And Tulsi Gabbard has quite a past with communist organizations, with people who are affiliated with North Korea, with the CCP. She has a lot of pretty strong connections with, and she's spoken at communist organizations, and as recently as just 5 years ago. So that's pretty concerning. And even 4 years ago, when she was running as a Democrat, she was saying things that really indicated that she is on the far left end of the spectrum. And it's hard for me to believe that somebody could go from that to being on the right. And you know, unless the only communists that I've seen that have been completely reformed and become truly, you know, anti-communist, they've done so because they found Christ. And the reason for that is that communism is not just a political system. It's not just an economic system. It's actually a religious system. It's an antichrist system. And so you don't just go from, you know, being committed to that kind of a religious system without having a true spiritual awakening. And so I have not seen any sort of Christian testimony from Tulsi Gabbard. You know, clearly she can speak MAGAese, but so can Patrick Byrne. So can Flynn. Flynn, I think, you know, he's a lifelong Democrat, and I think that he's a lifelong, not just a Democrat. I think that he's along the lines of Stanley McChrystal, who is he has been at least one of his closest friends. And yeah, so I just curious, very, very curious. And um, the reality is that he's got choices here that are going to upend a lot of people, and we'll see how the confirmations go. And maybe Tulsi Gabbard is completely a reformed communist, and she's not going back, and she's going to do a great job with the as the director of national intelligence, which is, this is a huge job. This is the director over. She's going to be over all 17 different intelligence agencies. There's a lot of people who are very, very connected to the status quo there. So yeah, we will see what happens. I am going to be, I said yesterday that I was going to be on the MG show today, and as I was talking to Jeff and Shannon this morning, we all kind of agreed that doing it Friday would be better. And so I'm going to be on their show tomorrow at noon, 12:05 Eastern. And so look forward to joining you there. I will also be doing my members only podcast tomorrow afternoon, sometime after that. And so I'll put that out tomorrow morning and notify you about that. And that's for my subscribers to become a part of that. Go to biggertruthmedia.com, and that's biggertruthmedia.com. Tulsi is a good pick, in my humble opinion. JRM says, and that very well could be. I'm open to that possibility. But she does have common sense, and Trump is right in picking her up for DNI. That very well may be. But I also, one thing that I found is that our model of deciding whether somebody's good or bad based on what they say it's a very flawed model. In this world, it's just too easy for people who are trained in, especially those who are trained in military intelligence, to put forward an image of themselves that is not real. Yeah, I mean, personally, and it's a matter of opinion, but I personally like Marco Rubio for Senate and or for Secretary of State. I think that that's a good pick. I think that he, from his time in the Senate, he knows how to get along with lots of different people. He's been working very closely with President Trump throughout, especially the last year of his campaign, but he's been working closely with him for some time. And I think he's a good choice. She adapted Hinduism for a while, and his Hindus believe in Christ principles, though they may not believe in churches. Yeah. And there are Hindu communists too, I believe, but let's hope she found God. Still suspicious. And yeah, and we'll see. We will see. What else to judge on, if not what someone says or does? I mean, we have to look at what they do. And so, she's been helpful to Trump in the same way that Marco Rubio has been helpful to Trump. And I think the thing to judge people on is their fruit and what they do more than on what they say. And so, yeah, I mean, I think putting her in that position is a good way to test, and maybe that's what Trump's doing. Maybe he is just putting them forward to test them to see if they produce. And we will see. And I think he's going to be watching closely. He knows he's only got 4 years, and I'm certain that he's going to work his tail off. He's going to be the hardest working, just like he does with his campaign, just like he did the first year, his first term. He's going to work his tail off. So, yeah, most Hawaiian Islanders are mixed breed, and yeah, I mean, there's so many different influences. There is a strong CCP influence in Hawaii. So yeah, so we will see what happens, and no matter what, I think now is the time to both grab our popcorn and get to work I think especially in our personal lives and the lives of those around us. And the more we can do to make life better around us, the more we can, like President Trump has said, dream big again. And I gotta find that sign and I gotta put it up. I'm gonna put it up behind me or something. Because I think that's just that was one of my favorite things about going to Grand Rapids was seeing that they were putting out that narrative as part of their campaign. And I just think that is a um I just think it's a big thing. So let's dream big. Let's let's do what we can in our community and with our neighbors and in our families and in our jobs and wherever we have whatever responsibilities God's put before us. And um yeah. And and this is actually a good thing. I like this. So I'm personally happy with Tulsi, but others might not be. I'm unhappy with Marco Rubio. Um, but that's how governments are formed. And that's really true. I mean, we agree on the things that are most important, and we're all free to disagree on the things that are less important. And when we don't allow others and the media and whatever to get us into a position of anger to emotionally manipulate us into thinking that the world's going to end because Trump picked so and so or whatever. If we don't allow ourselves to get manipulated into hatred or hopelessness, then we can disagree and it's okay. you know we could be friends with Democrats again. you know and they may be, many Democrats are so brainwashed that maybe they'll never get over it, but maybe they will, and maybe we can help by being a change agent within our communities. So and it's just like I'm seeing people who have followed Flynn and believe just the memes that they've been given. He's an American hero. They destroyed his life. He's a living martyr. And they believed all those memes, but then they're starting to say, why isn't Trump picking him? Wonder what's going on there. And then they start seeing some of the information that I put out and others put out and realize, oh, well, we haven't really been given the whole picture, have we? And um and so we can be friends with even with people who have been indoctrinated really strongly against people like us that hold different positions than they do. So let's all get together. We can. And um I'm happy that new codes aren't in the hands of Cackletoe. Absolutely. um and yeah, I think we will be. I think it's in January. I think it's January 3rd for the House. I think for the Senate it might be after that. I'm not sure. So yeah, it's coming. That'll be good. And once a Trojan horse, always a Trojan horse. And that may be. And everybody can be redeemed too. So there's a lot of changes coming. And so I think we should just enjoy it and try to smile more and fret less and work hard and just control what we can and put the rest in God's hands. So I'll leave it with that until till tomorrow on the MG show. And for members, again, for $5 a month, you get access to all of my archives and my members only content, which includes on Fridays I do a Q&A. So we'll see you then. Thanks.